Good afternoon. Welcome to this live broadcast of our meeting. My name is Peter Ginder, and I'm chair of the Minneapolis Charter Commission. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so we can verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Boone is come around. I'll come back around. Commissioner Clegg.
Here.
Davis Carter is absent. DeMillo.
Here.
Doherty.
Here.
Garcia.
Present.
Hawkins is absent. Hill is absent. Kozak.
Here.
Nay.
Here.
Perry.
Here.
Sandberg.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Vice Chair Rubenstein is absent. And Commissioner Boone.
Present.
Chair Ginder.
Present.
We have 11 present.
Let the record reflect we have a quorum. We will now proceed to our agenda. The agenda for today's meeting is before us. Commissioners, as this is a special meeting of the Charter Commission, we are limited to the items on the posted agenda. So without any objection, the agenda is adopted as is. Next on our agenda is the chair's report. As I've noted, this is a special meeting of the Charter Commission, and on it we have several items. And one of the reasons that this special meeting was called is because we have the updates from the City Council and the Mayor on the proposals that were sent over to us by the city. And also on this agenda is the Even Year Elections Work Group, and that's a group that this commission has spent a number of years, approximately 5 years, working on that issue, and we stopped working on that issue about 2 years ago, basically in light of difficulties with processing ballots because of ranked choice voting and some other related issues that touched on that legally and administratively, and I thought it was appropriate at this time to have an update on that status so that depending on the update, we can move forward with that issue. So with that background, our first agenda item is going to be receiving and filing letters we've received from the council and the mayor's office related to government structure charter amendments. Both letters have been mailed to the commission and are available to you alongside with marked up notes on the amendments from the council members. So with those in front of us, is there any discussion on those letters from either the council or the mayor? Seeing no discussion, I will ask the clerk, I'm sorry.
Hi, sorry, I just have a question. With regard to the actual articles and the notations on them, I see that there's, numerous strikeouts and amendments. Are those the ones that our working group did, or are these different and done by the city council?
Councilmember Dort, I'm not sure, but I believe that those were done by the city council. I don't believe that those are our amendments. I haven't gone through those carefully, but I was just noting more of the comments on the side rather than the red lining or blue lining.
Chair Ginder.
Commissioner Clegg.
If I may, the thin packet with the letters attached in front, those are what the city attorney presented to us with strikeouts of existing language and new language underlined. The thick packet is the research and the work product that we did in considering even year elections.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Clegg. Commissioner Sandberg.
So what I understand is the packet from the city attorney's office, but the comments that are on the side, those came from the city council. Is that correct or not?
Commissioner Sandberg, that's my understanding. Those are comments from the city council.
Chair Ginder, if I may.
Yes.
So this, the packet that is included with the letter from the council as you've said, those comments are by the council members. This was attached to the letter that they submitted. So all those comments are from the various council members regarding the articles.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
Can I ask a question about that letter? I know it's not signed by all the, I'm sorry. The letter is not signed by all of the council members. Does that mean that they disagreed with what was in the letter, or they just didn't have an opportunity to sign it?
Mr. Carl,
Mr. Chair, and to Commissioner Smith, I don't have an exact answer, but I do know that there was discussion amongst the council and that the names that are signed on were those who were in agreement with the letter as it was sent. So I would assume that if a name is not on there, then they are not necessarily in agreement with the letter that was sent forward.
Thank you.
Commissioner DeMello.
Thank you, Chair Ginder. With regards to both letters, noting that the mayor's letter was dated March 4th of 2024, just yesterday, I would personally, as a body, would like to hear more on why we are being requested to delay some of our work and just a more clear reasoning behind this request.
Mr. Carl, do you have any-
Chair Ginder and Commissioners, perhaps I can shed a little light on this, and hopefully this will be a level set for all of us. You may recall that this body had a joint meeting with the mayor and council on Halloween, October 31st of last year. The proposal has been, and was mentioned at that time, an amendment to basically bring alignment between the city charter as the city's constitution and the omnibus ordinance on government structure that the mayor and council adopted in October of 2022. There are several places where those things are not necessarily in alignment. And so the goal or the proposal had been to bring that alignment through an ordinance. An ordinance is one way that we can amend the charter. The other way is, of course, a ballot question. However, the way to amend through an ordinance is fairly arduous. It requires first this body to agree that the amendment or series of amendments proposed are appropriate to be done by ordinance, step one. Step two, it requires that that ordinance go through the entire legislative process and be approved unanimously by all 13 members of the council, thus having the council on board. And then it must be approved by the mayor. After it's approved by the mayor, there is a 90-day delay period where for the first 60 days, there's a protest period in which a petition by citizens can demand that the matter be referred at an election to the public, because that's the primary way to amend the charter is through a ballot question. If during the end of that 60-day protest period a petition has not been filed, then an additional 30-day delay is in place until that ordinance becomes effective. And so because of the process involved, it was our goal as staff to have the primary actors, the Charter Commission, the council, and the mayor, at that meeting on Halloween last year, understand the full scope of those changes. This body took one of those proposed changes, which was a new Article 10, related to boards and commissions created within the charter itself. So not boards created by the council through its own authority, but created within the charter. The Planning Commission, the Civil Rights Commission, the Civil Service Commission, and a proposed new commission, a Board of Ethical Practices or Ethical Practices Commission, and put those into a separate new article. Currently, the three bodies are spread within multiple articles, and they're not all together. So the thought was, if we're cleaning up and bringing alignment to the charter, we could put those bodies in another new article with no changes, just moving them into an article and then adding the one new board, the Ethical Practices Commission. This body said they didn't want to give any further consideration to that article and to take that off the table, to leave it alone, and put those three boards that are created in the charter back where they were. So that's one direction that's already been given. The mayor, in his letter, after negotiating with council leadership over the last several weeks, ever since the new council was installed in January, has been talking about one issue that's received significant attention and has, as this body knows, received significant attention since the government structure amendment was adopted by voters in 2021. That is around the issue of which department heads does the mayor appoint and are subject to council confirmation. Having reached an impasse on that with council leadership, the mayor's letter says, I think we should take that issue also off the table. And then we could consider the scope of the rest of the amendments. So that would be taking off the proposed new Article 10 and not addressing any change in the appointments as they currently are in the charter. Everything else could be considered. I believe what the council, the majority of the council who signed that letter, is saying is that they don't have a comfort with really any of the rest of it either. They need more time to digest and think about that. And you may remember it was either at December or January at this body's meeting I mentioned. We have a new council, and there's going to have to be time for us to bring them up to speed on what these significant changes across the charter would mean. That has not happened yet in the first 2 months of this body's work as a council since it was installed in January. And so I think, without speaking for the mayor and council, what I would suggest is that with this body taking off the Article 10, the mayor saying let's take off the appointment issue, and the council saying we need more time to digest what's been proposed, even if those two items are taken off. That is why I think the proposal is here to say this was not a series of amendments that this group proposed. It wasn't a series of amendments proposed by the mayor or the council. It was a series of amendments that the staff brought forward and said, now that we have the government structure ordinance in place, we'd like to bring alignment between the charter and the ordinances. And that's what we brought to the joint meeting last October 31st. It seems, from my perspective, in sort of being in that space between the three bodies, that there isn't agreement that the time is ripe and that there is energy to move forward on basically a full slate of amendments across 9 articles contained in the charter. I did my best to be as brief as I could, but I think that explains where at least the mayor and the council are on this process, and would explain why there is a proposed request, I should say, for delay until there's been a chance for more structured briefings and understanding of the entire scope of what would be left, even if those 2 proposals are taken off the table.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Commissioner Doherty.
Mr. Chair and Mr. Carl, I am wondering, with regard to the appointment of department heads, how is that going to be for this coming year, for this coming process, if this amendment is tabled? Will the mayor appoint all department heads, or will they be appointed by his leadership team?
Mr. Chair, to the Commissioner's question, if the amendment as proposed was taken off the table, then we would stay with the status quo. The status quo is there are 25 departments. Of those 25 departments, the mayor nominates, subject to council approval, 10. And those 10 would continue to be nominated by the mayor and appointed with the consensus of the council. The others, who have never been appointed by the mayor and approved by council, would continue to be appointed by their respective executive officers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Are there other questions? Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Carl, can you sort of walk me through, as I know I'm the newest person on this dais, and I was not, I did not participate on the October 31st meeting, although I probably would have dressed up in costume as well. Can you just sort of walk me through how the comments that the council has shared with us, how those were put together? Are those, was it part of a committee hearing? I guess how, if I'm hearing you correctly, there haven't been, appropriate briefings or enough briefings. So how did these comments come to be? And are they coming from a committee, or just, how were they put together?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Nye, which one is it?
Nye.
Nye.
Like Bill Nye, but spelled correctly.
Thank you. Commissioner Nye, apologies. I can't answer how those comments came to be. They did not go through the council or the council committee's normal legislative process. I myself was not involved in any way in the preparation and submission of that markup that was submitted to the body. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could.
Commissioner, first of all, I should note for the record that we've been joined by Commissioners Hill and Davis Clark, so we're at fuller strength, not at full strength, but Commissioner Hill.
First of all, Mr. Chair, sorry for being late. I went to the Public Works building, and I was waiting around like, where's everybody at? So I apologize. Mr. Chair, Mr. Carl, I just have a question around timeline for the council. When are they thinking timeline for us to pick this back up? So if they want to table it and get a better understanding of this, what is their timeline for us to pick this back up?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Hill, I don't want to misrepresent statements on behalf of others, the council or the mayor. I don't think that they want to table this or not pursue this. I think it's more of a what I'll call delay.
Yep.
And in terms of timelines, because we have opted to pursue amendment by ordinance, which is the alternative pathway allowed by statute, there really isn't a timeline for that, in that there is plenty of time for us to consider the actions and timing when the ordinance could come forward through the council's process. The statutory time clock, such as it might be called, or I would refer to it, applies to when we want to put questions on the ballot to submit to voters. And just briefly, since we might be talking about that later, I'll give you a highlight. We have to have those questions to the Secretary of State and the county auditor. I think it's 74 days before the election each year. And so this year, if we were to put a question on the ballot, that would be Friday, August 23rd. So if we were pursuing a ballot question, we would be on a timeline. But because we were proposing to do this by ordinance, that timeline is not necessarily applicable to us.
Commissioner Doherty.
Just one more quick question. The last line of the letter from the city council says, "We recommend that a joint meeting between the mayor, city council, and charter commission be scheduled within the first quarter of the year to discuss how to proceed." Has there been any movement towards trying to find a date, given the fact that we're coming on to the end of the first quarter?
Mr. Chair, and to Commissioner Doherty, no, the movement hasn't happened at this point, but it is something that I would look to this body for direction on. The council, at least the ones who signed on to this letter, are interested in a joint meeting. I don't know if the mayor is likewise inclined. I'm not sure that there is as much pressure to move forward in the first quarter of the year. I will note that the council's letter came much earlier in the year, as those negotiations I mentioned between the council president, vice president, and the mayor were ongoing, talking about specifically the appointments. So I'm not sure that there's the same level of urgency to have it done within the first quarter. I do think there is interest in meeting with this body to follow up on the joint meeting we had in October of last year. And I believe, and can't speak for this body either, that there is at least some interest on this body to also conduct a joint meeting to have an open dialogue with the elected officials about their input. So certainly happy to work on that. I'm fairly confident it is not going to happen by the first quarter. 5 of the council members will not be here next week. They're attending the National League of Cities Conference in D.C. The week thereafter, the mayor and most of his cabinet will be absent, attending to some very important training related to the city's emergency operations plan and continuity of government. So I'm fairly confident we're not going to get that done in March, and this body's next regular meeting would be in May. So the earliest would be is probably sometime in April if we were to move forward on that. And I would look to you, Mr. Chair, to get a sense from this body about how eager we are to move forward with a joint meeting, given that there is a need for more briefings with the mayor and council, and that at least 2 significant portions of the original slate of proposals have been taken off the table.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. First, I would note, although the date on the letter from the council is January 31st, that I did not receive this letter until approximately 2 weeks ago. So there was a delay in the process. And so after that letter was received, that's when I contacted the mayor's office to see if there was going to be a comparable letter coming from the mayor's office, which in one sense leads to today's meeting, because it was apparent to me that we were not going to meet our hopeful first quarter joint meeting. Personally, I think if we were to be hopeful of a second quarter meeting, that would be an aggressive timeline. But that would be where I would kind of, at least my position would be, is that we would try to aim for this second quarter joint meeting. And and I'm interested in any thoughts on that, if people think that's a reasonable amount of time, or if there'd be something other than that. Commissioner Doherty.
Just for the record, I first received this letter from the council and their comments on the articles today. And I believe that's the same for at least the two commissioners sitting next to me. So I think it would be important to have time to go through this and see what their comments are. But I would like to move forward with a joint meeting. It seems like it takes a while to schedule these, so
Yeah.
moving forward would be fine with me.
Commissioner Clegg.
Mr. Chair, I don't have a question, but I have a suggestion that I could put in the form of a motion. And that is that, well, first a little background. This ordinance that currently deals with government structure was agreed by the council and the mayor. It's really their ordinance that we're trying to conform to the charter. And both the council and the mayor would like us to delay. I would suggest that we have actually 3 work groups that are working on this amendment. The Amendment Review Committee is working on Article 10, which has been tabled. The Appointments Committee is working on the provisions of who appoints who in terms of department heads. And the Language Review Committee is working on the general language of the proposed amendment. I would suggest we refer this matter back to those 3 work groups. Keep going forward, meet with the council and the mayor if that's possible, but give it back to the people who are actually doing the work on it until it's ready for the full Charter Commission to consider.
Thank you, Commissioner Clegg. What I would suggest is that your motion is appropriate. I would do it on the next item on our agenda, which is the officer appointment discussion process. I think that would directly reflect that. I think for this moment right now, is there a general belief that at least if we're going to aim for a joint meeting, that the second quarter is perfectly fine, because there is work to be done both on the review of this and the other items. And if in the absence of dissent on that, I would just give some direction to Mr. Carl that the second quarter would be something that would be acceptable to us. And if that's okay, then I think what I will do is direct the clerk to receive and file the letters from the mayor and the city council, and then move on to discussion item number 5, which is the officer appointment process. And I'll let Commissioner Clegg make his motion again, but I do want to note that on the Language Review Committee, we did come up with proposed changes that have been sent forward to the council, so that there is a draft that has, of the charter, that has corrected to our plain language standards, so that is ready. We do have the ongoing issue with the amendment review on Article 10, and much of the rest of the items that were submitted to us, some of, I should say, not much, but some of them are subsumed into the appointments process. You know, for example, some of the officers and directors and that kind of discussion, as well as the changes for personnel. So since we have that now, I think it's appropriate for your motion right now, Commissioner Clegg, which would be to refer, as I understand your motion, is to refer the officer appointment process discussion back to that work group.
That's correct.
Okay.
So, to be clear, I'm not suggesting we table the matter. I'm
Correct.
suggesting we refer it back to the committee that was doing the work on it.
Correct. And is there a second to that motion? We have a second. Is there any discussion of that? We have Commissioner Boone.
The one question that I have as we think about having a joint meeting in the second quarter, does that give staff enough time to have the conversations with council and the mayor's office so that they be ready for us to have a meeting in the second quarter?
I believe, if I understood Mr. Carl earlier, that at least is a reasonable amount of time to see if there's further interest in doing a joint meeting and getting that scheduled. And
Scheduling is one thing, being prepared to have the conversations is something
Okay.
in addition to that.
Mr. Chair, I can't speak to whether or not that we'll have adequate time to provide briefings to all of the council members and the mayor. We certainly can make an effort at that, and we'll do so. I think my understanding is that there's an interest in this body, and I know there's an interest in at least a majority of the council to simply meet and talk. And I don't know that there needs to be a lot of advanced preparation by staff to allow the council and the Charter Commission to have that conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Commissioner Doherty.
Now I'm a little bit confused. My understanding from reading Mayor Fry's letter is that Article 10 and the portions of Article 4 that relate to appointments are going to be, it makes sense to delay the next round of the above structural changes until next year. So by that, does that mean that the meeting in the first quarter that the city council is talking about is on the remainder of the issues, or is that going to also include those portions of Article 4 and all of Article 10?
The appointment issues are found in Article 7, not 4. Article 4 is all about the city council. So there aren't anything, there are no proposed amendments in Article 4 that have been taken off the table. The things that were taken off the table was creating a new Article 10 and then the appointments issues, which are in Article 7. A little bit of those go into Article 8. If you make the changes in 7, then some changes in Article 8 would be required. No changes in Article 4
Yeah, I'm
relate
sorry,
to the
that's
appointment
my-
process.
my-
But I believe, could be incorrect, that the letter from council, although it was received late, dated January 31st, was very early in this term. I believe I had at that time already mentioned to this body, we have a brand-new council, not ready to come have a joint meeting yet. A number of the council members apparently had conversations about their positions and signed on to a letter. That was sent off. As that process happened and ongoing through this last week, the council leadership, meaning the council president and the council vice president, who meet with the mayor every 2-week cycle, have been discussing, and I have been part of those meetings, concerns about where can we find agreement and where is there not agreement. And the mayor surfaced this issue of, it seems the most disagreement is on appointments, and in order to allow everything else to proceed, if the council would agree to it, I'm willing to take this off and take this off the table for now. And there was a conversation that I missed, the last one, which I think was where the mayor offered that, and council leadership said, okay, but they still would like to have more time to digest the other changes in all the other articles. So I do think that there is an interest in at least understanding what the implications and impacts of the remainder of all of the amendments would be. I don't think there is, I don't read a lot of enthusiasm in the council for pursuing those changes in short order. I think that if I were to guess at the council's interest in this, it's something that they are in the middle of a second 2-year term, back-to-back, and are up for election again next year. And that between the mayor and the council, probably they would spend the rest of this term studying, evaluating, and considering these proposals and possibly be ready to do something with them maybe next year, maybe next term.
Mr. Carl. Commissioner Garcia.
I have a question, Mr. Chair, about a clarification of Commissioner Clegg's motion, which is of the appointments piece, the Article 10 piece, and all the rest, which of the ones are you requesting be referred back to the subcommittee?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Clegg.
at our last meeting, we voted to table the Article 10 materials until next year at least.
Yes.
So those are
Okay.
on the table until next year. The rest of the provisions would go back to committees for continued work and work with the council and the mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Clegg. I
Go ahead.
respectfully disagree and think that we ought to consider the mayor's request to put off discussion about the appointment process. I think that with the new city council and the mayor coming up with this request to put off the discussion on appointments, I think we ought to offer the mayor and city council the space to go ahead and discuss and see what kind of consensus and agreement that they may come to. Thank you.
Other comments, concerns? I guess I will just offer that in putting into some context, if we agree to delay these items, not only item 10, which we've previously delayed, but if we delay this item, or, which I see similar to referring it back to committee where it can spend its own time on doing this, that's a matter of polity with the mayor and the council, that, working with them to come to an agreement on this. Ultimately, we have our own timelines on how we want to move forward on this. So I think by referring it back to committee or to the work group, we let them do whatever work they want on this while we can still, work with the mayor and the council on delaying this, but just, we have our own preparation that goes forward too, even though we're not moving forward to a final resolution on it.
Thank you, Chair Ginder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So relative to Commissioner Clegg's motion, is there a deadline by which we as a full body would have to receive any work done in order to make the deadline Mr. Carl mentioned to get on the ballot for this year?
My belief on this is if we move it forward, that if we're working in accord with the council's request and the mayor's request, that we're not likely to make the ballot for this year. We're not prohibited from doing it, and if the committee wants to do whatever work it wants to do on it, it can, and it can bring that back to us whenever it wants. But I think that the tenor of this is that we really do not anticipate on putting Article 4 on the ballot this year. That's not written in stone, but that's the idea that we're doing right now, is we're putting this back into committee to let them do the work on it that they would like to do, and with the understanding we have these outstanding requests from the mayor and the council that we're kind of working with them on this.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chair. And just so that I'm clear, and I apologize, one more question. So we are just talking about Article 4 here, and we're not talking about
No.
Articles.
No. I don't want to confuse everyone, Mr. Chair, but there are amendments that have been proposed. There are 9 articles in the charter, and what staff brought forward have amendments in almost all of them. The only articles that had no amendments whatsoever were Article 5 around the Board of Investment and Taxation and Article 6 around the Park and Recreation Board of Commissioners. 1, 2, 4 is about the city council, 7 is the administration of the mayor, 8 is about officers and employment and civil service commission, and 9 is all money matters, finance and budget. There were amendments in all of those that were comprehensive in scope. So what we were proposing was to take all of those amendments in an omnibus ordinance and do one ordinance containing all of those changes. I'm sorry if there's a confusion about an Article 4. There are some proposed amendments in Article 4, but it was really more of a comprehensive approach to all of the articles being amended. What was taken off the table, to be clear, this body took off the proposed new Article 10. The mayor and council leadership, the mayor has suggested, and I think council leadership concurred, to take off amendments specifically in Article 7, which is about the administration, where it talks about the mayor's appointment of certain department heads and the council's confirmation of those. So those two matters, I think, from this body and from the elected officials would be removed from all of the other amendments across the charter if and when the three actors involved, this body, the council, and mayor, chose to move forward. I hope that clarifies that. I'm sorry for making it confusing.
No, Mr. Carl, I really appreciate that, Mr. Chair. So, again, what are we talking about tabling here? Or what are we talking about, not tabling, excuse me, what are we talking about moving back to committees?
We're moving back to committee. Those items in the amendments that came forward to us, anything that touches upon department heads is going back to the department head work group. We had the remainder of the items, non-department head items, were with the amendment review committee. That came forward, and we tabled Article 10 on that. There are other issues that we have not addressed that have not been the focus of our attention, frankly, as we've gone through this, and there are still items out there. We could move those back to the amendment review committee, but my feeling is, in light of what we've got from the city council and the questions that they have in all the city council, that those items too can kind of rest as we sit here today, many of which are actually, I think, more appropriate to amendment by ordinance, where the council would go in and say, these are, I don't want to use the word technical changes, but these are changes that are kind of more focused on the things that are not as impactful of the public at large, and that have to do with how we want to set up some of, for example, the elections in the event of a vacancy. That's something that really could be within their control to handle by ordinance. There is in the beginning on the powers of the city attorney, or excuse me, the powers of the city, that is probably very uniquely suited to a 13-0 vote. And so those have not been items we've focused on. They remain with us, and if the amendment review, if we can send them back at any time to the amendment review committee and say, let's take them up if that's the desire of the commission. But at today's date, right now, we're formally putting back anything to do with department heads back to the work group.
So it's just the department head. Okay.
Yes.
I appreciate that. It's not all the articles. Gotcha. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion, which is to refer back to the officer appointment work group, those matters.
Commissioner Boone,
Aye.
Clegg,
Aye.
Davis Carter,
Aye.
DeMillo,
Aye.
Doherty,
Aye.
Garcia,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Kozak,
Aye.
Nye,
Aye.
Perry,
Aye.
Sandberg,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
and Chair Ginder.
Aye.
We have 13 ayes.
That motion carries. The final item on our agenda is even year elections. And I mentioned this at the beginning. This is a topic that the Charter Commission has worked on for approximately 5 years, going back to 2017 through 2022. We've gathered a lot of materials on it. There's been a lot of discussion on the item. But in 2022, we ended up more or less tabling the matter, primarily because of issues with regard to how we could put this on the ballot. Problems with ranked choice voting, problems with the county being able to handle a multi-page ballot, a number of those kind of technical/legal issues. And it's been roughly 2 years since we've done that. And so I thought it was appropriate at this time to get an update from the city clerk on, have there been any changes in that scenario? Since he is the chief elections officer for the city, he would be aware of that. And depending on what we hear today, if there are still impediments, then we will end up likely postponing this item again. If it looks like there's a possibility of moving forward, then we can go back to sending this back to the committee, the work group, and have the substantive discussion about whether we think this is a good idea or not a good idea, and have something that we could bring forward. So that's the purpose of this on our calendar today. And so with that, I would ask Mr. Carl if he could provide us some update on where we are in the elections world and the ballot world.
Happy to do so, Mr. Chair. And Michael, you may have to turn on my mic. Happy to do so, Mr. Chair. I want to defer to Commissioner Clegg, who first created the working group on even year elections, in case there was any framing discussion you wanted to offer before I jump in.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. I'm ready for you to jump in.
Well, then I'll get into my presentation. But we're here to talk about the even year elections proposal. Before I do, I thought perhaps you might be interested. Yesterday was an election day. It was our presidential nominating primary. And so I thought I'd share with you some high-level facts about turnout that we had for yesterday's presidential primary. We had a total turnout of 20% of our registered voters yesterday. That reflected a total of 48,886 ballots that were cast. In our primary, vote by mail continued to be the preferred early voting method, a trend that we predict will continue with the adoption now by the state legislature of the permanent absentee ballot list, which becomes effective in June. This was the first election to feature additional language materials under required law. And we received very positive feedback both from our voters and our election workers about the new signs and the sample ballots that were produced using additional languages. A total of 5,672 voters took advantage of our early and absentee voting methods to cast their ballots before Election Day during that 46-day window. That was roughly 11% of the total turnout, though. So clearly, in Minneapolis, as long the trend, and I think across the nation, people prefer to cast their ballots at their polls in the precincts on Election Day. This year marks the third presidential primary since 1990 in the city of Minneapolis. The first was in 1992. Total turnout then was 15.7, so just shy of 16%. The second, you'll recall, was in the 2020 presidential election. We achieved a 48% turnout for that election. And then this year we had a 20% turnout. So high-level stats on yesterday's presidential primary. And with that, I'll jump in. So this slide shows, unsurprisingly, that our municipal elections have shifted over the years. In the earliest days, city voters elected their municipal officials in April of every year. So for those 20 years that are shown between 1867 and 1887, the city of Minneapolis conducted municipal elections in both even and odd years. And then more than a century ago, in about 1888, municipal elections in Minneapolis were set for April in even-numbered years. The elected terms were set at 2-year intervals. You can see that the patterns have changed many times over the last century. It was in 1973 that the state legislature acted to create a uniform municipal election schedule, but it left the determination about whether municipal elections would be in even or odd-numbered years to the governing bodies of each of the cities. Because Minneapolis is a home rule charter city, the specifics of our municipal elections are detailed in our charter, our constitution. Thus, the council, as the city's governing body, cannot act unilaterally to change the dates of a municipal election, which is true for statutory cities. Instead, any change to the timing of regular municipal elections in Minneapolis would need to be addressed as an amendment to the city charter. Under Article 3 of the charter, the the article that deals with elections, it generally talks about the conduct of municipal elections in Minneapolis and aligns the conduct of those elections with state election law in almost every part. There are some obvious deviations, and that includes, for example, the use of ranked choice voting as the method for conducting municipal elections under Section 3.1b. The fact that candidates for mayor and council may provide a political party or a 3-word principle on the ballot, despite statewide statewide law declaring that all municipal ballots shall be nonpartisan. Our charter allows a deviation, but only for mayor and council, not for Board of Investment and Taxation or Park Board members. That's set under Section 3.1D1. The ballot order for Minneapolis is prescribed in the charter, and that's because we're the only city that has an elected park board and an elected Board of Investment and Taxation. It's under Section 3.1D2. How the impact of redistricting, and as we are all familiar, the impact of the Conn rule would be harmonized through redistricting and follow-up elections, provided under Section 3.2D, and of course, the fees for candidates for municipal offices set under Section 3.4. The city charter also prescribes in a number of sections the date for regular municipal elections. Here, the revisions that were made as part of the plain language charter several years ago eliminated the convenience of a single section that sets the date for regular elections and instead spread it across 4 sections. Instead of having it in elections, they tied it to the term for council in Article 4, the term for Board of Investment and Taxation in Article 5, the term for the Park Board in Article 6, and the term for the mayor in Article 7. So the terms are spread throughout and are tied with each of the elected offices. So I identified for those sections for you. The city council and the mayor, of course, the respective sections essentially state that officials shall be elected at the general election that's conducted, and this is the quote, each year following a year whose number is evenly divisible by 4. What that works out to translated is it's the odd-numbered year after a presidential. And so in Minneapolis, we have what we like to call the regular 4-year election cycle. Year 1 is the presidential election in an even-yeared year. Year 2 is the municipal election in the next following odd year after the presidential. Year 3 is the gubernatorial election in the next even-numbered year. And then year 4, thankfully, is an off year when we have no regular elections at any level of government, although it's always possible to have one or multiple special elections. And I'll point out that in 2020, in the presidential election year, we did 6 elections in 2020 in the midst of COVID. So that was a fun year for sure. The last off year we had was 2019, and before that was 2015. This chart shows you the 4-year cycle with the presidential in one year, followed by the municipal in the next. The title of this slide says everything. Minneapolis is unique. And in terms of the administration of elections, unique here means complicated. As reflected on this slide in Minneapolis, we use the alternative ranked choice voting methodology, affectionately referred to as RCV, to choose elected officials. Minneapolis was the first jurisdiction in Minnesota to adopt RCV in 2006, and we implemented it for the first time in conjunction with the municipal regular election in 2009. At that time, there was no voting equipment that could automate or process an RCV ballot, so a full hand count was required, and it consumed 15 days after polls closed on election night in order to announce unofficial winners in all of the races. It's been 15 years since then and 4 elections later, and there is still no certified equipment available on the marketplace that automatically tabulates an RCV ballot. The Minneapolis ballot is also incredibly long. We have a total of 25 races on each of our regular municipal ballots. That includes a mix of single-seat and multi-seat races. Under state law and regulations, ballots are limited according to the allowable size of what they call the ballot card, the piece of paper. You can only use one card, front and back. There is a limit in terms of the size. There is a limit in terms of the size of the font. There is a limit in terms of size of the width and the length of the page, and a number of other factors, which, taken together, make producing and processing the city's RCV ballot with 25 different races in different styles very challenging to produce. Having elections in odd-numbered years has been the only way that we've been able to accommodate all of those challenges thus far. This slide provides some additional details about the legal and technical limitations. I've sort of highlighted that have challenged Minneapolis in terms of whether or not our municipal elections could be moved into even-numbered years and would also need to be factored if we were to move forward. As the chair noted, this body took the first step on that process in 2017 when it formed its own work group, and I've identified the LIMS file for you here. It's the City Charter 2017-9 is the file where all of our initial research can be found in LIMS. That year, this body hired a research intern from the University of Minnesota, Dylan Adams, and he researched even year municipal elections across the nation and provided insights into the pros and cons of that approach of even year municipal elections. A copy of his report is in that LIMS file that I've referenced. Of particular interest in his research was the impact on the city of Oakland, California. And that's because Oakland, California also has ranked choice voting for their elections. They adopted ranked choice voting before the city of Minneapolis, and they do conduct their municipal elections in even-numbered years. At that time as well, the clerk's office formed a staff-level working group that included members of my Elections and Voter Services Division, as well as our colleagues from Hennepin County Elections and the Secretary of State's office. And at that time, we identified a number of obstacles that were significant impediments to any move to change the timing of municipal elections in Minneapolis. The major issues that we identified are highlighted on this slide in those 4 points. In the 2013 municipal election, when we had 35 declared mayoral candidates, we were pushed to use the longest ballot card allowed under the law with the smallest font size allowed under the law, and we barely fit it in. There were no ballot questions that year, which was good. We would not have been able to accommodate them. As already noted, there wasn't any certified equipment available to automate and process RCV ballots in 2013, and as I said, that remains true today. Most significantly, as we explored the possibility of transitioning our municipal elections into even-numbered years, we were told by the county that our voting systems absolutely could not accommodate a mix of traditional and RCV ballot styles. So you'll recall that in a traditional ballot style, there are 3 columns across the length of the ballot, and the races run from left to right, and you go down 1 column before coming up to the middle column, go down, you go to the 3rd column and come down. Then you turn the page over. For ranked choice voting, because we have to have 3 choices in each race, we have a horizontal ballot style in the midst of what is a very vertical style. So it breaks the ballot style on the ballot to mix the 2. That fact that we couldn't mix the horizontal and vertical styles in a single ballot was essentially the nail in the coffin for the proposal 7 years ago, because we were told it was not possible to mix those 2 styles on a single ballot. And as a consequence, as the chair mentioned, work essentially was dropped at that point. So what's changed since 2017? Turns out a lot. This slide summarizes some of the major issues that have changed since my last report to the body. In 2020, you may recall, with the departure of former council member Abdi Warsami for Ward 6, we were faced with the need to conduct a special election to fill the remainder of his unexpired term. Between 2017 and 2020, the state legislature acted to limit the dates when special municipal elections could be conducted, narrowing it to only 5 dates during any calendar year when a special municipal election can be conducted. And those 5 dates include, as 2 of them, the regular primary in August and the regular general election in November. Those uniform special election dates are codified in municipal statute or Minnesota statutes, section 205.10, subdivision 3A. Due to the timing of Councilmember Warsami's departure, the city was faced with the fact it would need to conduct that special election in August in conjunction with the regular state primary in a presidential election year. Despite previous claims that a mix of traditional and RCV ballot styles was technically not possible, we were successful at working with Hennepin County and our ballot production and voting equipment vendors to achieve what had been said earlier was impossible. And we did incorporate the special election for Ward 6 using the RCV style in a presidential primary ballot layout. As a result, we know it is technically possible to merge the ballot styles. However, what remains true is that it would be impossible to merge the entire municipal ballot, all 25 races, into a traditional ballot. It would exceed the length that's limited by law, simply because of the number of races we have and the way we'd have to have 3 columns for each of those 25 seats. So although we can merge the styles, we couldn't merge the entire municipal ballot with either a presidential or a gubernatorial ballot. In other good news, however, the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, known as RCVRC, if that isn't confusing enough, developed what it calls its Universal Tabulator. The Universal Tabulator is a system that automates the tabulation of RCV ballots. and that is huge news. The system is a non-proprietary system. It's available to any jurisdiction to use. And I'm happy to report to you that Minneapolis played a major role in the development of the Universal Tabulator. It was our 2013 ballot with those 35 mayoral candidates that was used as the test deck by the developers of the Universal Tabulator. And it was our Minneapolis RCV method for tabulating ballots that was used in the design, build, and test of the Universal Tabulator. And although the Universal Tabulator has not been certified according to federal and state standards for voting systems, which is mandated, we know firsthand that it works. First, because it consistently produces the same results when we use our city's 2013 test deck and run it through the tabulator. What took us 15 days to do, or I shouldn't say 15, in 2013 it took us 3 days. What took us 3 days to do takes less than 3 minutes for the Universal Tabulator to spit out the same results. So we know it works. And in our 2021 municipal election 2 years ago, we went ahead and used our normal process for processing RCV ballots. And once we had posted our unofficial vote results, we pushed all the same results to the Universal Tabulator just to see what it would do. And it gave us the same results like that. So we know that it works, but it's not certified. It needs to either be certified according to federal and state requirements, or we need to have provisional certification provided to us by the Secretary of State, which is within the Secretary's delegated legal authority. Additionally, number 3, we have new assistive voting devices that are now available, and they can support a mixed style of traditional and RCV ballot styles. That's very important. For those of you who have worked as election judges or who have been in the polls, you know that in the last few years we had a device called the AutoMark. The AutoMark is an assistive marking device for those who need assistance to mark their ballots. Those devices were very, very old. They came about as a result of the Help America Vote Act, and they were the first generation after the Help America Vote Act, and we literally just replaced them, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. So we've had them for way too long. We were thankful to get rid of them. The new OmniBallot assistive marking device can't mark it, but the latest generation of that OmniVote assistive marking device can assist a voter in marking an RCV ballot. And we in the city of Minneapolis will be using that new technology for our pop-up voting centers this August for the primary as a test, with the idea that we would transition to that new fleet either for this year's general election in November or certainly for next year's election. And so technology is finally catching pace with where we have been since 2009. And then finally, the state legislature, if you haven't heard, is considering a proposal that would permit the use of ranked choice voting in all home rule, charter, and statutory cities throughout the state of Minnesota. Called the Local Voices, Local Choices Bill, it has been introduced in both the House and the Senate, and we expect it has a good chance of passing this session. The bill would allow any city in the state to opt to use ranked choice voting for its municipal elections and to do so in either even-numbered or odd-numbered years. That will compel all jurisdictions to find a way to make sure they can use RCV in both even-numbered and odd-numbered years if the bill passes. The Secretary of State has formed a working group in anticipation of the successful passage of that bill, and I'm pleased to say that our city's elections director, Katie Smith, is a member of that working group. The working group is exploring what issues would need to be addressed if the bill passes. Again, assuming the bill passes, that significantly improves the chances that Minneapolis would be able to move its municipal elections into even-numbered years. So I took a stab at what are some of the potential benefits associated with the change to even-numbered municipal years, including the potential for increased voter participation, the opportunity to save some money, and the chance to reduce the possibility of voter fatigue from what can seem at times to be back-to-back elections in the city of Minneapolis. Research across multiple jurisdictions across the nation over many years consistently shows that the highest rates of voter participation are during even-numbered years when presidential and gubernatorial elections are at the head of the ballot and when those elections are generally conducted. Odd-numbered election years simply do not have the same turnout and have always suffered in comparison in terms of the rate of participation. This slide shows participation across all elections from 1968 to last year in the city of Minneapolis. At the bottom in yellow is our municipal election year turnout. The red is our even-numbered gubernatorial elections, so what some people call the off-year election, and then the presidential election is shown at the top in blue. You all know that Minneapolis is one of the votingest cities and the votingest states in the nation. And even though turnout is much lower, as shown here in our off-year municipal elections in the odd-numbered year, I am very proud of what we have been able to achieve. What we achieve here in the city of Minneapolis in our odd year is envied by other communities that have odd-year elections. The city of Los Angeles, for example, conducts odd-year elections for their municipal government, and their average is somewhere between 12 and 15%. We averaged 54% in 2021. That's not common for off-year, city-only, odd-year elections. So I do think that we have an incredibly strong turnout in our odd-year municipal elections. But as you can see, turnout is much lower in the odd-year election for city than it is in the even-year numbers for gubernatorial and presidential election years. And I think of those spaces between the yellow line and the red line and the blue line as opportunity costs. Those are opportunities lost for voters who otherwise could be participating. And you may know, I think I've reported this before, after every one of our municipal elections since 2009, when we started ranked choice voting, the city has conducted a post-election survey of voters, of non-voters, of our election workers, to get a sense of how we're doing. And interestingly enough, in each of those surveys, there's a section for non-voters that talks about why didn't you vote? And one of the number one reasons we've gotten every single year is this: I don't vote in odd year elections. I just won't. I won't vote in an odd year election. I vote in the even year elections. So I think there is some validity to the idea that moving to an even-yeared election could capture a greater number of voters who know to turn out in the even-numbered years. I did ask my staff to do a quick analysis on this slide and to say what would turnout have been if we could go back and rewind the clock and move that yellow line into either the presidential year or the gubernatorial year, either the year before or the year after. What could have been the results? So this slide shows you on the far left in blue is the presidential election year and the total turnout in the middle column there that we actually achieved in the presidential election year. In the middle column is the municipal election year and the total turnout. And in the far right in green is the gubernatorial election and the actual turnout. Research shows, I mentioned that there's been years and years of research. Research shows that when cities are moved into even year elections, there is roughly consistently about a 30% what they call roll-off. And that means people vote at the top of the ticket, president, governor, secretary of state, U.S. congressman, but they drop off down ticket or down ballot. So they might not get to, for example, Park Board or BET. Roughly 30% of the people who vote in even-numbered years don't get to the bottom ticket. We accounted for that in these numbers. So, shown in red there, you see the actual turnout that we were able to achieve in our municipal year, an odd year, from 2009 to 2021. If we had equalized that out for the other years, if we had moved, you can see what we might have achieved, again, estimating, based on the total turnout that we did achieve in the presidential or gubernatorial election, and then taking 30% of that off. So that shows you what the potential, remember I said those opportunity costs? That shows you what the opportunity costs might have been. It's not an official, it's just an estimate. But I think that it shows there could be an advantage to moving to an even-numbered year. So even when we adjusted for that 30% average roll-off I mentioned, you can see that if we had done our municipal election year from 2021, which was our highest on record, highest ever, achieving 54% turnout in a municipal odd-year election. If we'd done it the year before in the presidential, we would have gained an additional turnout of up to 56.9%. And that accounts for the roll-off, too. So that's not incorporating that 30%. And as you can also see going down that chart, turnout would have been higher for the municipal elections if it had been conducted in either the presidential or the gubernatorial years in 2016 or 2018 rather than 2017, and again in 2012 or 2014 rather than 2013, and then again in 2018 or 2008 or 2010 instead of 2009. So the data are fairly consistent here locally and match up with data that has been done by other researchers and academics nationally. I'm simply saying on this slide what I think is fairly obvious. The biggest benefit to the city for an even year election is the likely increase, potentially significant, in actual voter turnout and participation. The drawback, of course, is that there would undoubtedly be some percentage of that roll-off amongst voters who don't get down ticket. However, as the data shows, even with that average roll-off, the total turnout and level of participation is likely to be at least equal, if not greater, than what we see today in our odd-year elections. And of course, there are additional potential benefits to the city that I mentioned, both for voters and taxpayers, which includes lowering the cost of administering elections in 3 out of the regular 4 years of the standard election cycle. And those savings could no doubt be available for other high priority issues across the city. I'm sure there are other pros and cons associated with the proposal to switch to even-yeared elections, and we could certainly explore that if this body chooses to move forward with that proposal. Finally, assuming that I've piqued your interest a bit or renewed it, as the case may be, this slide highlights the transition process for moving from our current odd year to even year elections. As you can see, there are some legislative and rules changes at the state level that would be needed. I've highlighted those. Again, the Local Voices, Local Choices bill proposing RCV for all cities would be a tremendous boon to us in that regard. The city of Minneapolis would certainly benefit from having statewide standards for ranked choice voting and the ability to use automation and technology to process mixed style ballots. Locally, as I said earlier, we need to amend the city charter and those sections that define the regular municipal election year. It's reflected on this slide here where it says in section 4.2b, for example, for council and et cetera. So those are the sections that would need to be amended. A ballot question submitted to voters must pass with at least 51% of the ballots cast on that question being done in the affirmative. And then there would be an effective date. Finally, and this is unique to changing the year of municipal elections, if the standard election year or regular municipal election year is changed, notice must be given no later than 180 days before the date of the next regular municipal election. So assuming that this council or this commission wanted to move forward, for example, this year, if there was enough interest to move forward this year to put a ballot on, as I mentioned earlier, the deadline to get the question to the Secretary of State and the county is August 23rd. So the process of developing that ordinance, putting that work together, and refining a final proposal would have to be done in enough time to get that proposal submitted. And of course, as you know, the City Council writes the ballot language. So there would have to be time for them to write the ballot language through a resolution and pass it. And all of that work would have to be done in time to file it with the Secretary of State and the county by Friday, August 23rd. It could be on this year's ballot. Then we would have to give that 180-day notice. Assuming the question passed at the ballot on November 5th, that notice has to be given no later than January 30th next year, because the next municipal election is next year, November 5th. I'm sorry, it's not the 5th. So we would have to give notice by January 30th of next year in order to change the election to an even-numbered year. There are a host of other smaller issues. Those are the major changes that would have to be done legally to transition from the current odd-numbered election year to an even-numbered election year. I'm fairly positive about the outlook, as I said, because of the changes both in terms of the legislature and its potential acceptance of RCV for statutory cities and what that would require in terms of legal changes, ballot changes, including the potential to possibly have more than one ballot card. And all of those issues would have to be explored further. With that, Mr. Chair, I've completed my lengthy presentation about the status of elections and the potential to move, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. As usual, there is a font of information that you've just given to us. I'm going to open the floor for questions, but before we do that, I'd like to put this in a little bit of a context. Is today's discussion really isn't about whether or not we should do or we should make the changes or the pros or cons of even year elections. It's rather is looking at what Mr. Carl has outlined here. Does it look likely enough that there'll be changes in place, for example, in 2025, to to put this on the ballot, assuming we wanted to do that. I mean, my projection here today is we would end up referring this back to the Even Your Workplace group for them to work on. And if it looks like, as they proceed through this, that there's a reasonable likelihood that if they wanted to put it on the ballot, it's something that could go on the ballot, then that's a question that they could bring back to us and to say, do we want to do even year elections or not? But if it's not going to be possible to do it, then we don't need to expend that effort. So I think our questions for Mr. Carl today are kind of, okay, what's this world look like administratively and legally as we refer this back to the committee or to the work group? You know, is this something that we're just going to continue to look at for the next couple of years? Is it something that, hey, it looks like there's enough inertia here that it's worth our time to try and put it on the ballot, assuming, again, that we believe substantively it's something we want to do. So with that kind of background, questions, Commissioner Clegg.
First, thank you very much, Mr. Carl. This was a very thorough presentation. And I wonder if you could get us electronic copies of your slide deck.
Absolutely. If it isn't already posted, we'll be posting it to this meeting agenda immediately after the meeting, and I'll email it to all of you as well.
Thank you. And second, obviously, if Minneapolis instituted a change, elected officials would either have a term shortened by a year or lengthened by a year. And I know there's a state statute that covers that, so it's not something we would have to deal with or even could deal with. The state statute would be deciding. But we should know how that works. And if we don't now, then, and if we refer this back to the work group, that would be an important part of their work, I think.
Other questions? Commissioner Doherty.
Following up on what Commissioner Clegg just was discussing, my understanding is the City Council had an election in 2023 because of the redistricting and the need to have it then, and now are having it again in 2025 because that realigns them with the odd year and the mayor's term. Is that correct?
Through the chair, Commissioner, that is correct.
Thank
That's
you.
the impact of what we've called the Con rule, which applies to cities of the first class that elect all of their council members at the same time in the same year to non-staggered terms. And because Minneapolis does that, it affected us. It will affect the city of Minneapolis every 20 years. It's a recurring cycle. And so every 20 years, the council members, and only the council members, not the mayor or the park board or BET, would have to stand for two-year terms back to back and then get back onto the 4-year cycle.
So based on that, my question would be, it becomes even, it seems to me, more important in terms of whether their term would be shortened or lengthened based on the fact that they are already currently in 2 back-to-back 2-year terms.
Other questions? Commissioner Nye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would agree. Thank you, Mr. Carl, for a really excellent presentation. I know for me, yesterday it was very easy for me to walk in, cast my ballot, and leave. It took 2 minutes, and I was in and out. One question I have for you is, now that the state has what we're calling restore the vote, do you have any data or information as to how that has played out in Minnesota or in Minneapolis?
Through the chair, Commissioner Nat, I don't have data at this point right now. It's something that the elections office is tracking. And I can probably share more of that impact with you after the general election, so in your December meeting or early next year.
Thank you. And just to follow up, Mr. Chair, can you, Mr. Chair, can you sort of let us know the last time the even year election work group met and who's on it and what sort of their last discussions were regarding?
Commissioner, I can't give you the exact date. It was in 2022 was the last time that work group met. It provided a report to the full commission. The commission, and I won't have the terminology correct, basically postponed or tabled the item because of the administrative and legal issues that have just been discussed. I did happen to write down who was on the commission at that time, or on the committee that time, so it's the commission, the work group is, the chair is Clegg, Commissioner Sandberg, I believe, was vice chair, Commissioners Perry, Smith, Kozak, and Ginder were also on the even year work group. And so if we refer that back to the work group, that is, in assuming those members still want to be on the work group, that will be the work group, and I will, if other people would like to participate in that work group, please let me know either after the meeting or whatnot, and we'll look at appointing other members as necessary. Other questions for Mr. Carl? Commissioner Sandberg?
I think I missed something. You discussed the need for a charter amendment to do this. Is that because we believe that it could not be enacted by ordinance for political reasons, or is that an option?
Mr. Chair, I may have misunderstood your question. You said, does it have to be a charter amendment? Yes. It must be a charter amendment because all of these things are set by the charter. You raised an interesting question. Does it need to be a ballot question? Technically, no. It could be by ordinance. The city council, of course, would have to lead that effort, and that effort would then require this body to say, yes, we think this is a good proposal and you should do it by ordinance. It would require the ordinance to, once it's finally done, be adopted 13-0, and it would require the mayor's approval. And so this body had initiated this scope of work about the potential of which election year should city elections be in. So it has been a body of work that's vested here at the Charter Commission. The council and mayor haven't touched this issue.
Commissioner Kozak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carl, just a quick question. The legislation you mentioned that's currently, it's been introduced in the House and the Senate. If that legislation were not to pass, are we done for?
Through the
Or
chair,
at least for this go around?
through the chair, Commissioner Kozak, I can't answer that because I'm not certain what the secretary might do in terms of provisional certification. I'm not sure what other actions might happen at the state. There is interest separate from ranked choice voting with the Secretary of State about increasing from one ballot card to multiple ballot cards to accommodate judicial races, ballot questions, and things like that. So even if the local choices legislation about ranked choice voting were not to pass, there is another level of pressure around election administration and ballot cards and numbers and things like that that could be another way for the city to move forward on this on its own.
Thank you. That's helpful to know.
Commissioner Doherty?
One more question. Given the fact that that a move like this would really radically alter what a ballot would look like, it would also alter, it would seem to me, what campaigning would look like for the various folks running, because they would be running with, for example, looking at the two parties, a slate almost of people. Do we have any idea at this point how those elected officials would feel about combining or moving from odd year to even year?
Through the chair, Commissioner Doherty, I don't have any information or knowledge of that.
Commissioner Doherty, there's a packet that has a lot of information that has been gathered by the prior work group, some of which touches in some fashion on that. It explores a broad range of the pros and cons of even versus odd year elections. There's a lot of material in these handouts that I think are very useful to look at as you try and digest how you might want to look at this issue, but that is addressed. And, you know, for example, Minneapolis is already different, as Mr. Carl pointed out, is, you know, in our municipal elections, you know, being partisan and having a description, and so we're already different in how that impacts us, and so some of the things you might read in the packet won't necessarily apply to us because of that kind of alignment we already have. And I think there are additional materials in separate portion of LIMS also on even year elections also. So there has been a lot of work done in gathering material that will, I mean, it's a lot to look at, but if you're interested in that, the material is there.
Thank you, Mr. Carl, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no other questions, I think I would entertain a motion to refer this matter back to the even year elections work group, if someone were so inclined. We have a motion, and is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Chair, I would also, I don't know if this needs to be part of the motion, but that we would open up membership of the work group to anyone who is interested in joining.
I indicated that if people are interested, to please contact me after the meeting, and we'll expand that group. I believe there are currently 6 members, and so there's room for some more. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Commissioner Boone,
Aye.
Clegg,
Aye.
Davis Carter,
Aye.
DeMillo,
Aye.
Doherty,
Aye.
Garcia,
Aye.
Hill,
Aye.
Kozak,
Aye.
Nye,
Aye.
Perry,
Aye.
Sandberg,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
and Chair Ginder.
Aye.
You have 13 ayes.
Thank you.
That motion carries. That also concludes our agenda. And so, first of all, I would like to again thank Mr. Carl for all of the work he did in preparing for this meeting and elucidating the issue for us. And with that, we stand adjourned.